Shut your mouth, you ignorant ghetto trash, before I drag you off these steps myself. Officer Derek Morrison's face burned red with rage. His meaty fist twisted into Judge Valerie Washington's hair, yanking her head back with savage force. She stumbled, but her eyes remained steady, calm, almost knowing. "Please, officer, there's no need for violence," she said quietly, her voice cutting through his fury like steel. Morrison's grip tightened. "Don't you dare tell me what I need. You people always think you're so smart, so superior." His free hand shoved her hard against the patrol car. "But out here, I'm God." The courthouse steps buzzed with protesters, news cameras, and the electric tension of injustice unfolding. Judge Washington's lips curved into the faintest smile, like she knew something Morrison didn't, something that would destroy him completely. Have you ever watched someone's world collapse in real time? Because what happened next changed everything. Judge Valerie Washington's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., the same time for the past 8 years. Her modest two-story home in Riverside's Oakwood neighborhood sat quietly among maple trees, their leaves rustling in the pre-dawn breeze. The smell of fresh coffee filled her kitchen as she reviewed case files, her Harvard law degree catching the morning light from its frame above her desk. At 42, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had fought for everything she achieved. Her journey from a public defender working 18-hour days to becoming Riverside County's youngest black female judge hadn't been easy. The local newspaper still kept the photo from her swearing-in ceremony, her mother crying in the front row, her father's proud smile beaming despite his factory worker hands clasped nervously in his lap. The steam from her coffee mug warmed her face as she flipped through witness statements for Monday's assault case. Outside her window, her small garden bloomed with tomatoes and roses, a weekend ritual that kept her grounded. Growing things reminded her that justice, like plants, required patience and careful tending. Her Honda Civic's engine hummed to life as NPR's morning news filled the car. The drive to downtown took 15 minutes through neighborhoods that told Riverside's story, from the struggling East Side where she grew up to the gentrified districts near the courthouse. She knew every street, every corner where justice had either triumphed or failed. The Sunrise Cafe sat 2 blocks from the courthouse, its windows fogged with warmth. Maria Santos, the owner's daughter, always had Judge Washington's order ready, black coffee and a blueberry muffin. The small bell above the door chimed as she entered. "Morning, Judge. Are you coming to the rally today?" Maria asked, wiping down the counter with quick, practiced movements. "Just as a citizen," Judge Washington replied, accepting the steaming cup. "Supporting accountability isn't political. It's necessary." The cafe buzzed with early commuters, construction workers grabbing breakfast burritos, nurses heading to the hospital, teachers reviewing lesson plans. This was her community, the people she served. Their trust meant everything. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Derek Morrison started his shift with complaints. 15 years on the force had hardened him into something ugly. His patrol car reeked of stale cigarettes and resentment as he listened to the morning briefing crackle through his radio. "All units, be advised. Peaceful demonstration expected at courthouse area. Maintain professional distance unless safety concerns arise," dispatch announced. Morrison snorted, adjusting his rearview mirror to catch his partner's eye. Professional distance. These bleeding hearts don't understand what keeps this city safe. Officer Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat. Morrison's views made him nervous, but challenging a senior officer meant career suicide. The internal affairs complaints against Morrison were whispered about in locker rooms: excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation. Nothing ever stuck. The blue wall protected its own. "Looks like rain," Jenkins offered, trying to change the subject. Morrison's radio crackled again. "All units. Media presence confirmed at courthouse rally. Command emphasizes appropriate conduct with cameras present." "Cameras," Morrison muttered, his jaw clenching. "Like I'm gonna let some liberal media tell me how to do my job." The courthouse area transformed throughout the morning. Riverside Community Coalition members arrived early, setting up speakers and organizing signs. Reverend James Thompson directed traffic flow while keeping energy positive. The smell of food trucks mixed with autumn air as families gathered. Local news crews positioned their equipment strategically. Channel 7's Sarah Carter tested her microphone while her cameraman adjusted lighting. The story was routine. Community groups demanding police accountability measures, transparency in misconduct investigations, civilian oversight boards. Judge Washington parked 6 blocks away, not wanting her presence to become the story. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her judicial robe safely hanging in chambers. The walk gave her time to think about the delicate balance she maintained, supporting justice while preserving judicial neutrality. The courthouse steps filled with diverse faces, teachers, nurses, retirees, students. Their signs read, "Transparency Now, Justice for All, and Reform Police Culture." The energy was peaceful but determined, voices raised in unity rather than anger. Morrison's patrol car cruised the perimeter like a shark circling prey. His eyes scanned the crowd, looking for trouble he could legally address. When he spotted Judge Washington's purposeful stride toward the demonstration, his predatory instincts activated. "There," he told Jenkins, pointing. "That one looks like trouble." The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. 2 worlds were about to collide, one built on service and justice, the other corrupted by power and prejudice. Neither Judge Washington nor Officer Morrison could imagine how completely their lives would change in the next few hours. The rally continued peacefully, unaware that history was about to unfold. Officer Morrison's patrol car rolled to a stop 50 feet from Judge Washington's Honda Civic. His predatory smile spread wide as he radioed for a routine traffic investigation. The afternoon heat shimmered off the asphalt, making everything feel charged with electricity. "Jenkins, run the plates on that vehicle," Morrison commanded, pointing at the modest sedan. "I want to know everything about our troublemaker." Judge Washington walked steadily toward the courthouse steps, her simple protest sign reading "Justice for All" held with quiet dignity. She had no idea Morrison's eyes tracked her every movement like a hunter sizing up prey. "Clean record, current registration," Jenkins reported, squinting at his computer screen. "Belongs to V. Washington, clean driving history." Morrison's radio crackled with supervisor warnings about media presence, but he ignored them. The sight of this composed black woman joining the reform rally ignited something dark in his chest. 15 years of getting away with misconduct had made him feel untouchable. Judge Washington reached the demonstration's edge when Morrison's voice boomed behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to speak with you about your vehicle." She turned, her expression calm but alert. "Is there a problem, officer?" Morrison's chest puffed out as he approached, his hand resting on his belt. "Your car's parked in a suspicious location. I need to see your license and registration immediately." The demand made no legal sense. Her parking was completely legal, visible to dozens of witnesses. But Judge Washington had seen this movie before. She knew Morrison was fishing for confrontation. "Of course," she replied evenly. "May I ask what specific violation you're investigating?" Morrison's face flushed darker. Her calm, educated tone triggered something primal in him. "Don't question my authority, girl. Just do what you're told." The word "girl" hung in the air like poison. Several protesters turned their heads, sensing trouble brewing. Channel 7's camera operator noticed the interaction and began adjusting his lens for a better angle. Judge Washington retrieved her documents with deliberate precision. "Here are my license and registration, officer. Everything should be in order." Morrison snatched the papers, his thick fingers leaving smudges on the plastic. He studied them with exaggerated suspicion, clearly performing for the growing audience. "V. Washington," he read aloud. "What's the V stand for?" "Valerie." "Valerie what?" "Valerie Washington." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You being smart with me, Valerie? Because I don't appreciate your kindness." The racial undertone was unmistakable. Reverend Thompson stepped closer, his weathered hands clenched into fists. Other demonstrators began forming a loose circle, their phones emerging to document what was unfolding. "Officer," Judge Washington said quietly, "I'd like your badge number and the name of your supervisor, please." Morrison exploded. "You think you can demand things from me? You think because you're at some little protest rally you have rights?" His voice carried across the courthouse steps. Sarah Carter motioned frantically to her cameraman, who swung his equipment toward the confrontation. The red recording light blinked on, capturing everything. Ma'am, step away from your vehicle and place your hands where I can see them, Morrison barked, his authority mask slipping to reveal pure malice underneath. Judge Washington complied with quiet dignity. May I ask what crime you suspect me of committing? Don't play dumb. I can smell marijuana coming from your direction. The lie was so blatant that several witnesses gasped. Judge Washington had never used drugs in her life, and the accusation in front of rolling cameras was clearly manufactured. Officer, I don't use marijuana. You're welcome to conduct any legal search, but I'd like to understand the probable cause. Her knowledge of legal terminology seemed to infuriate Morrison further. He stepped closer, using his bulk to intimidate. Probable cause? Let me explain probable cause to you, sweetheart. The crowd's energy shifted dangerously. Morrison's partner Jenkins emerged from the patrol car looking increasingly uncomfortable with his colleague's behavior. The situation was spiraling beyond any reasonable police procedure. Sir, Jenkins called out weakly, maybe we should— Shut up, Morrison snapped. I'm handling this. Judge Washington maintained her composure despite Morrison's aggressive posturing. Officer Morrison, she said, reading his name tag, I'm exercising my right to remain silent and request legal representation. Legal representation? Morrison laughed harshly. You watch too much TV, lady. This is the real world where I decide what happens. He grabbed her purse without permission, dumping its contents onto her car's hood. Lipstick, tissues, her judicial ID in a zippered compartment, car keys, and reading glasses scattered across the metal surface. Morrison pawed through everything with deliberate disrespect. What do we have here? He said mockingly, holding up her reading glasses. Trying to look smart? The crowd's anger was palpable now. Reverend Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying decades of authority. Officer, this woman has done nothing wrong. She's peaceful, cooperative, and exercising her constitutional rights. Morrison whirled around, his face twisted with rage. Get back before I arrest you for interfering with police business, old man. Local attorney David Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, his briefcase clutched tightly. Officer Morrison, I'm an attorney. This woman has requested legal representation, which is her constitutional right. I don't care if you're the Supreme Court, Morrison snarled. This area is under my control. Judge Washington watched the scene unfold with growing concern. Morrison's behavior was so extreme, so professionally inappropriate, that she began wondering about his mental state. No rational police officer would act this way in front of cameras and witnesses. Officer Morrison, she said quietly, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm simply exercising my First Amendment rights at a peaceful demonstration. First Amendment? Morrison's laugh was ugly. Let me teach you about amendments, college girl. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. Judge Washington winced but didn't cry out, maintaining her dignity even as pain shot up her arm. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Police brutality, someone yelled. This is wrong, called another voice. Cell phones emerged like flowers blooming, their cameras documenting every second of Morrison's meltdown. Jenkins finally found his voice. Morrison, we should call for a supervisor. I am the supervisor here, Morrison screamed, spittle flying from his lips. Judge Washington's composure in the face of such obvious injustice only seemed to enrage Morrison further. Her quiet strength, her educational background, her refusal to be intimidated, everything about her challenged his worldview and authority. You people always think you're so much better than everyone else, Morrison hissed in her ear. Always acting like you deserve respect. But I see right through you. The courthouse steps had become a powder keg. Morrison's racist performance was being broadcast live on Channel 7, while dozens of cell phone videos captured different angles. Social media posts were already beginning to circulate with hashtags like #RiversideRally and #PoliceBrutality. Morrison produced handcuffs, the metal clicking ominously in the afternoon heat. Valerie Washington, you're under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. What assault? Judge Washington asked calmly. I haven't touched you. You assaulted me with your attitude, Morrison snarled, clearly improvising charges. The fabricated arrest was the final straw for many witnesses. Angry voices rose as Morrison forced Judge Washington's hands behind her back. Her dignity remained intact even as the handcuffs clicked shut, her posture straight despite the humiliation. Morrison's radio exploded with chatter as news of the incident reached headquarters, but he was too deep in his rage-fueled performance to care about the consequences. His 15 years of getting away with misconduct had convinced him he was untouchable. He had no idea he was about to discover how wrong he could be. The handcuffs bit into Judge Washington's wrists as Morrison forced her against the patrol car's hood. The metal burned hot from the afternoon sun, but she endured the discomfort without complaint. Her silence seemed to fuel Morrison's rage like gasoline on fire. "Now we're going to do this the hard way," Morrison growled, his breath reeking of coffee and hatred. He began patting her down with deliberate roughness, his hands lingering longer than necessary. "Maybe this will teach you some respect." The crowd's anger reached a boiling point. Reverend Thompson's voice boomed across the courthouse steps. "This is wrong! Everyone can see this is wrong!" Morrison spun around, his face purple with fury. "I warned you people to stay back! Does anyone else want to interfere with official police business?" Judge Washington's purse contents remained scattered across her car hood. Her judicial ID stayed hidden in the zippered compartment, invisible among the chaos of scattered belongings. Morrison picked up her reading glasses again, studying them with mock fascination. "Fancy glasses," he sneered. "Let me guess. You went to some liberal college, learned a few big words, and now you think you're better than hard-working cops like me?" "I simply believe in following the law," Judge Washington replied quietly. Wrong answer. Morrison's eyes blazed with fresh anger. "The law? I am the law here, Princess. I decide what's legal and what isn't." His radio crackled urgently. "Unit 47, what's your status? Command is requesting an immediate update." Morrison ignored it completely, too focused on his performance for the cameras. Channel 7's equipment captured every word as he continued his racist tirade. "You know what your problem is?" Morrison said, leaning close enough that his spit hit her face. "You think because you've got some education, because you can string together a few sentences, that makes you equal to me. But look around, sweetheart. I've got the badge. I've got the gun. I've got the power." Additional police units began arriving, their sirens wailing in the distance. Sergeant Patricia Hayes emerged from the lead vehicle, immediately recognizing that something had gone terribly wrong. Her 20-year career had taught her to spot misconduct, and Morrison's behavior screamed impropriety. "Morrison!" she called out. "What's the situation here?" "Everything's under control, Sarge!" Morrison yelled back, never taking his eyes off Judge Washington. "Just dealing with another uppity protester who thinks she knows better than cops." Sergeant Hayes approached cautiously, her instincts warning her that Morrison had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The crowd's hostility was palpable, and the media presence made everything exponentially worse. Morrison continued his psychological warfare, forcing Judge Washington into uncomfortable positions while making degrading comments. "Stand up straighter, no, legs apart. Hands flat on the hood, that's better. Now you look like what you really are." The implication made several witnesses gasp in horror. Even Jenkins looked sick watching his partner's behavior. This wasn't police work. This was public humiliation with racial overtones. Judge Washington's legal knowledge began seeping through despite her attempt to remain quiet. "Officer Morrison, the Fourth Amendment requires reasonable suspicion for detention and probable cause for arrest. Neither standard has been met here." Morrison's face twisted with pure hatred. A black woman was lecturing him about constitutional law in front of cameras and colleagues. His fragile ego couldn't tolerate such perceived disrespect. "Constitutional law?" he screamed. "You want to play lawyer with me?" He grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around to face him. "Let me explain how the real world works, Professor. Out here, your fancy words don't mean jack. I say you're a criminal, you're a criminal. I say you're resisting, you're resisting." The crowd pressed closer, their anger reaching dangerous levels. Court stenographer Angela Foster recognized Judge Washington from professional interactions but remained silent, her phone recording everything for evidence. Local business owner Carlos Rivera live-streamed the confrontation, unknowingly creating the documentation that would later prove crucial in court. Morrison's radio continued crackling with increasingly urgent calls from supervisors. News of a police incident at the courthouse rally was spreading through the department like wildfire. Chief Collins himself was reportedly en route. But Morrison remained oblivious to the gathering storm. His racist rage had completely overwhelmed his survival instincts. When Judge Washington attempted to retrieve her phone from the scattered belongings to call her attorney, Morrison exploded with fresh violence. "Don't even think about it." He grabbed her wrist with crushing force, twisting her arm behind her back until she gasped involuntarily. "No phone calls, no lawyers, no more attitude!" "Officer," Judge Washington said through the pain, "you're violating multiple constitutional rights. This will not end well for anyone." Her composure in the face of brutality only intensified Morrison's fury. He couldn't break her dignity, couldn't make her beg or cry or submit the way his racist worldview demanded. Her quiet strength was a constant rebuke to everything he believed about racial hierarchy. "Constitutional rights," Morrison mocked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Where did you learn about constitutional rights? Some affirmative action program? Some diversity scholarship?" The crowd's reaction was immediate and angry. "That's enough!" shouted someone from the back. "This is America, not Nazi Germany." Morrison whirled toward the voice. "Nazi Germany! I'm protecting this community from troublemakers like her!" He pointed at Judge Washington with visible hatred. "People who think they can come to our courthouse and disrespect law enforcement." The confrontation had attracted more media attention. KQED's news van pulled up, followed by reporters from 3 other local stations. The viral potential of the incident was becoming clearer by the minute, but Morrison remained blind to the consequences building around him. "Look at all these cameras," Morrison announced loudly, gesturing wildly. "Everyone wants to see how we handle criminals in Riverside County. Well, here's your show." He forced Judge Washington to her knees on the hot asphalt, ignoring her sharp intake of breath as the rough surface bit into her skin. "This is what happens when you don't show proper respect to law enforcement." Sergeant Hayes made one more desperate attempt to intervene. "Morrison, we need to de-escalate this situation. There are cameras everywhere." "Good!" Morrison shouted back. "Let everyone see what happens when you resist police authority." The crowd's chanting grew louder. "Let her go! Let her go! Let her go!" But Morrison fed off their anger like a vampire feeding on blood. Each protest only convinced him further that he was right, that he was protecting society from dangerous elements. Judge Washington's continued calm began triggering something deeper in Morrison's psyche. Her education, her articulate responses, her refusal to be intimidated, everything about her challenged his belief system. In his twisted mind, she represented every black person who had ever made him feel intellectually inferior. "You think you're so smart," he hissed in her ear, "so articulate, so much better than everyone else. But I see what you really are underneath all that fancy talk." His hand moved toward her hair, his fingers twitching with barely contained violence. The crowd sensed what was coming, their voices rising in warning and protest. Social media posts were exploding across platforms. #Riverside Police, #Justice for All, #Police Brutality trending within minutes. Dr. Michelle Torres, a prominent civil rights attorney who had been watching the live stream, was already in her car racing toward the courthouse. Community leaders were making urgent phone calls. The incident was spiraling beyond anything Riverside County had ever experienced. "Officer Morrison," Judge Washington said one final time, her voice carrying decades of legal authority despite her vulnerable position. "I strongly advise you to step back and reconsider your actions. What you're contemplating will destroy your career and possibly your freedom." The warning penetrated Morrison's rage for just a moment. Something in her tone, a quiet confidence, an unshakable certainty, made him hesitate. But then his racist fury surged back stronger than ever, fed by years of unchecked prejudice and entitlement. "Destroy my career," he laughed maniacally. "Lady, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've handled hundreds of people like you, and I've never met one who didn't learn respect in the end." His fingers tangled in her perfectly styled hair. The crowd's voices reached a fever pitch of protest and warning. News cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail as Morrison's face contorted with pure hatred and racial animosity. "Time for your attitude adjustment," he snarled, his grip tightening as the hatred that had poisoned his soul for decades prepared to explode into an act that would destroy everything he thought he knew about power and consequence. The cameras kept rolling, documenting every second of what would become the most career-destroying moment in Riverside County law enforcement history. Morrison's fist tightened in Judge Washington's hair like a vice. The racial hatred consuming him had reached its breaking point. Years of unchecked prejudice, of believing his badge made him untouchable, of viewing black women as objects to be dominated, all of it exploded in one savage moment. "I'll show you your place," he screamed, yanking her head back with brutal force. The crack of her neck snapping backward echoed across the courthouse steps. Judge Washington's eyes watered from the pain, but her expression remained steady. The crowd gasped collectively as Morrison's violence played out in full view of rolling cameras. "That's what happens when you don't know your place," Morrison snarled, his spit flying as he spoke. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect for authority." But Judge Washington didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't break. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes with a calm that seemed to unnerve him. "Officer Morrison," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I need to make one phone call." Morrison laughed harshly. "Phone call? You think this is TV? You don't get phone calls until I say so." "Actually," Judge Washington continued, her composure absolute despite the assault, "I do get one phone call, and I'm making it now." Something in her tone made Morrison hesitate. There was an authority in her voice that hadn't been there before, not the desperate authority of someone trying to assert rights, but the quiet authority of someone who actually possessed power. Judge Washington reached for her phone with deliberate precision. Morrison moved to stop her, but something made him freeze. Her movements were too confident, too certain. She dialed a number while speaking clearly for the cameras. "This is Judge Valerie Washington. I need courthouse security at my location immediately." The words hit the courthouse steps like a thunderbolt. Morrison's face transformed from smug confidence to pale shock in seconds. "Judge, what did you say?" "I said I'm Judge Valerie Washington," she repeated, her voice now carrying the full weight of judicial authority. "Riverside County Superior Court." Sergeant Hayes nearly dropped her radio. Her hands shaking, she pulled out her phone and frantically searched the county website. Judge Washington's official photo appeared on screen. The same dignified face now looking calmly at Morrison despite the assault she'd just endured. "Oh my God," Hayes whispered. "Morrison, do you realize what you just did?" Morrison's world began crumbling in real time. His racist bravado evaporated like smoke as the reality sank in. He had just physically assaulted a sitting judge on live television. His 15 years of getting away with misconduct meant nothing now. "Judge, you said you were—" "I didn't know. This is just a misunderstanding," Morrison stammered, his hands shaking as he tried to process what was happening. The crowd's energy shifted dramatically. Reverend Thompson's voice boomed across the steps. "Did you hear that? He just assaulted Judge Washington, a sitting judge." Morrison's radio exploded with chatter as news reached police headquarters. Within seconds, Chief Collins' voice crackled over the airwaves. "All units, I need immediate status on the courthouse incident. Is it true an officer assaulted Judge Washington?" Morrison fumbled for his radio, his voice cracking. "Chief, there's been we have a situation here." "Get me Sergeant Hayes immediately!" Collins' voice roared through the radio. Hayes grabbed the microphone, her 20-year career flashing before her eyes. "Chief Officer Morrison has detained and physically assaulted Judge Washington during the courthouse rally. Multiple cameras are rolling. We need immediate supervisory response." The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. "Judge Washington has been assaulted?" Chief Collins' voice was barely controlled. "On live television?" "Affirmative, Chief." Morrison's partner Jenkins stepped away from him like he was radioactive. The other officers arriving on scene suddenly found reasons to maintain distance. Morrison was toxic now, a career killer that no one wanted to be associated with. Judge Washington removed her handcuffs using a key from her scattered belongings, a key Morrison had been too blinded by rage to notice. She stood with quiet dignity, straightening her clothes despite the trauma she'd endured. "Officer Morrison," she said, her judicial authority now fully revealed, "you have just committed multiple felonies on live television. You have violated my civil rights, committed assault and battery, and abused your authority under color of law." Morrison's legs nearly gave out. The tough guy cop persona had completely vanished, replaced by a man who suddenly understood that his life was over. "Judge, please. I didn't know who you were. This was all a mistake." "A mistake?" Judge Washington's voice remained steady, but steel ran underneath it. "Was it a mistake when you called me ghetto trash? Was it a mistake when you yanked my hair and forced me to my knees? Was it a mistake when you violated my constitutional rights?" The crowd had gone silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. Everyone understood they were witnessing history, the moment when justice and injustice collided head-on. Morrison fell to his knees, his police career dissolving before his eyes. "Please, Judge Washington, I'm sorry. I was just doing my job. I didn't mean any disrespect." But his recorded words contradicted every claim. Hours of footage showed his racist tirade, his deliberate humiliation tactics, his savage assault on a woman he thought was powerless. "Your apologies are meaningless now," Judge Washington said quietly. "Justice will take its course." Courthouse security arrived within minutes, followed by FBI agents who had been monitoring the rally. The federal implications were immediately clear. This wasn't just assault, it was a civil rights violation of the highest order. Morrison sat handcuffed in his own patrol car as news helicopters circled overhead. His phone buzzed with messages from fellow officers distancing themselves, from supervisors demanding explanations, from reporters seeking comments. Judge Washington stood on the courthouse steps, her dignity intact despite everything Morrison had put her through. She had won through quiet strength, legal knowledge, and the power of truth. One phone call had changed everything. Chief Robert Collins's patrol car screeched to a halt at the courthouse steps, its sirens still wailing. His face was ashen as he surveyed the scene. News crews everywhere, angry protesters, and his officer sitting handcuffed in the back of a patrol car like a common criminal. "Morrison!" Collins's voice boomed across the chaos.
"What in God's name have you done?"
Morrison looked up from the patrol car's back seat, his tough guy mask completely gone. Tears streamed down his face as the reality of his situation hit him. "Chief, I can explain. I didn't know she was a judge. This is all a big misunderstanding." Collins walked directly to Judge Washington, his hat in his hands. "Your Honor, on behalf of the Riverside County Police Department, I offer my deepest apologies. This is completely unacceptable behavior." Judge Washington stood with quiet dignity despite the red marks on her wrists from the handcuffs. "Chief Collins, your officer committed multiple felonies while cameras rolled. This isn't about apologies anymore." The paramedics arrived to document Judge Washington's injuries. The photographer captured the rope burns on her wrists, the red marks on her scalp where Morrison had grabbed her hair, and the scrapes on her knees from being forced onto the asphalt. "I'm fine," Judge Washington told the paramedics, "but I want everything documented for the record." Morrison's radio crackled with urgent messages. The police union representative, Patrick O'Malley, was already at headquarters reviewing the viral footage. His first statement shocked everyone. "The union cannot and will not defend Officer Morrison's actions. What we witnessed today violates every principle of professional law enforcement." Even Morrison's strongest allies were abandoning him. The blue wall of silence had crumbled in the face of such obvious misconduct captured on camera. FBI agent Maria Gonzalez took control of the crime scene with federal authority. "This is now a federal civil rights investigation," she announced to the assembled media. "Officer Morrison will face charges under Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law." Morrison overheard from the patrol car and began hyperventilating. Federal charges meant real prison time, not the administrative slap on the wrist he was used to receiving. "Chief," Agent Gonzalez continued, "we'll need all footage from your body cameras, dash cams, and any surveillance equipment. This is a federal crime scene now." Chief Collins nodded grimly. His department's reputation was in freefall, and every decision from here would be scrutinized by federal investigators. "Officer Morrison is suspended without pay effective immediately. We're cooperating fully with the FBI investigation." Judge Washington's phone buzzed constantly with calls from court administration, fellow judges, and civil rights attorneys. The legal community was rallying around her, while law enforcement was desperately trying to distance itself from Morrison's actions. Reporter Sarah Carter went live from the courthouse steps. "This is a developing story of unprecedented proportions. A Riverside County police officer has been arrested after physically assaulting Judge Valerie Washington during what appeared to be a racially motivated detention. Morrison's breakdown continued in the patrol car. "This isn't fair," he sobbed to anyone who would listen. "I've served this community for 15 years. I was just doing my job." But his recorded words contradicted every excuse. The footage showed him calling Judge Washington ghetto trash, uppity, and worse. His claim of just doing his job rang hollow against hours of documented racist behavior. Jenkins, Morrison's partner, was already being questioned by internal affairs investigators. "He's always made comments," Jenkins admitted reluctantly, "but I never thought he'd go this far." Within 2 hours, Morrison was formally charged with assault, battery, violation of civil rights, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The federal charges alone carried a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. Judge Washington held a brief press conference on the courthouse steps where the assault occurred. "Today's incident reflects broader systemic problems that require comprehensive reform," she said calmly. "No one should endure what I experienced, regardless of their position or background." Her grace under pressure only made Morrison's behavior appear more monstrous by comparison. Social media exploded with support for Judge Washington and condemnation of Morrison's actions. Morrison's wife filed for divorce that evening. His neighbors avoided eye contact. His own department treated him like a pariah. The man who thought his badge made him untouchable discovered that some lines, once crossed, destroy everything. The courthouse rally had achieved more reform in one afternoon than years of peaceful protests. Morrison's assault on Judge Washington became a catalyst for change, proving that justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually prevails. The cameras finally stopped rolling, but the reckoning was just beginning. 3 months later, the FBI investigation had grown into the largest police misconduct case in Riverside County history. Special Agent David Torres led a team of federal investigators who uncovered a pattern of abuse spanning Morrison's entire career. "What we found was systematic," Agent Torres announced at a packed press conference. "Officer Morrison had 37 complaints filed against him over 15 years. All were buried, dismissed, or resulted in meaningless administrative actions." The evidence room at FBI headquarters overflowed with documentation. Internal affairs reports showed Morrison had been accused of racial profiling, excessive force, and intimidation dozens of times. Each complaint told the same story: Morrison targeting people of color while his supervisors looked the other way. National media descended on Riverside like locusts. CNN's Anderson Cooper interviewed Judge Washington in her chambers, where she maintained the same quiet dignity she'd shown during the assault. "This wasn't about me personally," she explained. "This was about a system that allowed Officer Morrison to abuse his authority for years without consequences." MSNBC's Rachel Maddow dedicated an entire segment to Morrison's case, calling it a perfect example of how unchecked police power destroys both communities and the officers themselves. Fox News initially tried to defend Morrison, but quickly abandoned that position when the footage proved too damning. Federal prosecutor Alexandra Martinez built her case like a fortress, unassailable and comprehensive. The evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of videos from multiple angles, dozens of witness statements, Morrison's own recorded words dripping with racial hatred. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Martinez said during opening statements, "you will see a 15-year police veteran commit multiple felonies on live television while motivated by pure racial animus. The defendant's own words will convict him." Morrison's defense attorney, Richard Steinberg, knew he was fighting a losing battle. His client had been caught red-handed committing crimes in front of rolling cameras. Every defense strategy crumbled under the weight of evidence. "My client made mistakes," Steinberg argued weakly, "but he's not a racist. He was following what he believed to be proper procedure." Prosecutor Martinez's response was devastating. She played Morrison's recorded statements for the jury: "Ghetto trash, know your place, uppity, your kind." Each phrase landed like a hammer blow. The prosecution's witness list read like a catalog of Morrison's victims. Maria Santos, a Latina teacher, described being pulled over 5 times in 2 years for driving suspiciously. James Crawford, a black businessman, testified about Morrison strip-searching him during a traffic stop for a broken taillight. "Officer Morrison told me I looked like trouble," Crawford said, his voice breaking. He made me stand naked on the roadside while he searched my car. Found nothing, of course. Never apologized. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychology expert, explained Morrison's behavior to the jury. The defendant exhibits classic signs of authoritarian personality disorder combined with deep-seated racial prejudice. His assault on Judge Washington represents the culmination of years of unchecked aggression. Constitutional law professor Michael Carter testified about the civil rights implications. Officer Morrison's actions violated the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendments. This wasn't police work. This was state-sanctioned terrorism. Judge Washington's testimony was the trial's climax. She described the assault with clinical precision while maintaining her composure. Officer Morrison didn't see a citizen exercising constitutional rights, she said quietly. He saw a black woman who needed to be put in her place. Morrison's cross-examination attempt backfired spectacularly. When Steinberg suggested Judge Washington had been uncooperative, she responded with devastating calm. I complied with every lawful order. Officer Morrison had no lawful authority for his actions. The defense tried claiming Morrison felt threatened by Judge Washington's legal knowledge. The jury wasn't buying it. How could a trained, armed police officer feel threatened by an unarmed woman peacefully exercising her rights? Morrison's own testimony sealed his fate. Under oath, he continued making racially insensitive comments while trying to justify his behavior. I've dealt with people like her before, he said, not realizing how that sounded to a diverse jury. People like her? Martinez pressed. You mean educated black women? Morrison's silence spoke volumes. Expert witnesses demolished every aspect of Morrison's defense. Use of force specialists testified that his actions violated every training protocol. Constitutional scholars explained how his behavior threatened the foundation of civil rights law. Former Police Chief Collins, who had resigned in disgrace, testified about the department's culture of protecting bad officers. We failed Judge Washington, he admitted. We failed the community. We failed everyone by allowing Officer Morrison's behavior to continue unchecked. The jury's diversity reflected Riverside County's demographics: black, white, Latino, Asian, young, and old. They watched hours of video evidence showing Morrison's racist assault while taking careful notes. During closing arguments, Martinez delivered a masterpiece of legal advocacy. Derek Morrison thought his badge gave him the right to humiliate, assault, and degrade anyone he considered beneath him. Today, you have the power to prove him wrong. Steinberg's closing was a desperate plea for mercy. Derek Morrison made terrible mistakes, but destroying his life won't undo the harm. Show compassion. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes, barely enough time to elect a foreman and take a single vote. Foreman James Washington, no relation to the judge, stood to deliver the verdict with clear conviction. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. Morrison's legs buckled. His wife, who had filed for divorce months earlier, wasn't even in the courtroom. On the charge of assault and battery, we find the defendant guilty. Morrison began crying openly as each guilty verdict hammered another nail in his coffin. On the charge of civil rights violations, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Washington remained composed, but tears of relief glistened in her eyes. Federal Judge Margaret Carter delivered Morrison's sentence 2 weeks later. Mr. Morrison, you have betrayed the badge, violated your oath, and damaged the relationship between police and community. Your actions were motivated by racial hatred and enabled by a system that protected you for too long. Morrison stood shaking as Judge Carter continued. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will forfeit all pension benefits and are permanently barred from law enforcement. The gavel's bang echoed through the packed courtroom like thunder. Morrison was led away in shackles, his police career and freedom gone forever. Judge Washington watched from the gallery, finally seeing justice served. Outside the courthouse, protesters who had witnessed the original assault cheered as news of the sentence spread. Justice for Judge Washington, they chanted. No more police brutality. The Riverside Police Department underwent federal oversight, implementing comprehensive reforms including bias training, civilian oversight, and body cameras for all officers. Morrison's case became a teaching tool in police academies nationwide. an example of how racism and unchecked authority destroy everyone involved. 8 years in federal prison awaited Derek Morrison. His victim had returned to her courtroom, where she continued serving justice with quiet dignity and unwavering strength. 6 months after Morrison's sentencing, Judge Washington sat in her chambers reviewing case files as autumn sunlight streamed through tall windows. The room felt different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because her experience had transformed how she viewed her role in the justice system. A brass plaque now hangs beside her law degree, gifted by the Riverside Community Coalition, Equal Justice Under Law, in honor of courage. She touched it briefly each morning, remembering that justice requires constant vigilance from good people willing to stand up. Morrison's federal prison cell was a stark contrast: concrete walls, a narrow window, and the constant awareness that his former badge meant nothing here. Other inmates knew his story. Former cops don't fare well in prison, especially those convicted of civil rights violations. His request for early parole had been denied twice. The parole board's message was clear: show genuine remorse first. But Morrison still maintained his innocence in letters to local newspapers that refused to publish them. "I was just doing my job," he wrote obsessively. "The system failed me." His inability to accept responsibility kept him locked in the same mindset that destroyed his life. Judge Washington's experience had rippled far beyond Riverside County. She became a sought-after speaker at judicial conferences, police academies, and civil rights symposiums. Her message was always the same: standing up to injustice requires courage, but the system only works when good people refuse to remain silent. The courthouse steps where Morrison assaulted her had been transformed into a memorial garden. Bronze plaques honored peaceful protesters and civil rights leaders, while benches provided spaces for reflection. Tourists came from across the country to see where one woman's dignity triumphed over hatred. Riverside's police department bore little resemblance to Morrison's era. Chief Maria Santos, the coffee shop owner's daughter who had become a lawyer and then police chief, implemented revolutionary changes. Body cameras were mandatory, civilian oversight boards reviewed all complaints, and officers received monthly bias training. "The Morrison case taught us that protecting bad cops destroys good policing," Chief Santos explained to visiting departments seeking reform guidance. "We chose accountability over the blue wall of silence." Crime rates hadn't increased despite the reforms. In fact, they dropped as community trust improved. Citizens worked with police instead of against them when they knew complaints would be investigated fairly. Morrison's victims found various forms of healing. Maria Santos opened a community center for police accountability. James Crawford became a civil rights attorney specializing in misconduct cases. Others simply returned to their lives knowing justice had finally been served. Judge Washington's civil lawsuit resulted in a $3.2 million settlement from Riverside County. She donated most of it to scholarship programs for disadvantaged students pursuing legal careers. "Justice shouldn't be limited to those who can afford it," she explained. The courthouse where she presided had become known as the most fair and impartial in California. Attorneys from both prosecution and defense praised Judge Washington's balanced approach. She treated everyone, regardless of race, class, or background, with equal dignity under law. National civil rights organizations used Morrison's case as a template for police reform legislation. The Washington Act required federal oversight for departments with patterns of misconduct. 12 states passed versions of the law within 2 years. Law schools nationwide studied the case in constitutional law classes. Students learned how one officer's racism could violate multiple amendments while damaging entire communities. The footage became required viewing for police recruits, learning about appropriate use of force. Morrison's former colleagues struggled with his legacy. Some retired early rather than face the scrutiny his case brought. Others embraced reform, recognizing that Morrison's behavior had damaged their profession's reputation. A few quietly admitted they should have reported his misconduct years earlier. Judge Washington reflected on her experience during quiet moments. The assault had been traumatic, but her response had created lasting change. Sometimes standing up to injustice meant enduring temporary pain for permanent progress. "That day taught me that dignity is more powerful than hatred," she said during a recent interview. Morrison tried to break my spirit through racial violence. Instead, his hatred exposed itself for what it truly was, the desperate act of someone who knew his worldview was dying. The viral video that captured Morrison's assault had been viewed over 50 million times. Comment sections filled with support for Judge Washington and condemnation of Morrison's racism. The incident sparked conversations about police accountability in households across America. Morrison serves his sentence knowing that his name has become synonymous with police misconduct and racial hatred. History will remember him as a cautionary tale about what happens when authority corrupts completely. Judge Washington continues her service with quiet strength, knowing that justice prevailed not through violence or revenge, but through truth, courage, and the power of a system that ultimately holds everyone accountable. One phone call had changed everything. One woman's dignity had triumphed over decades of unchecked hatred. One moment of standing up to injustice had reformed an entire system. When we witness injustice, we have a choice: remain silent or stand up for what's right. Judge Washington chose courage, and her one phone call reminded us all that no one is above the law. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that justice can prevail. Subscribe to Black Soul Stories for more stories of courage triumphing over prejudice. Hit that notification bell because truth needs witnesses. What would you have done if you witnessed Officer Morrison's assault? Would you have spoken up, recorded the incident, or remained silent? Your answer might surprise you, and it definitely matters more than you think. Officer Morrison lost his career, freedom, and pension in 8 hours. Judge Washington's courage sparked reforms in over 200 police departments nationwide. Sometimes one moment of standing up to injustice changes everything. Real change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. Judge Washington's experience proves that dignity, courage, and truth remain our most powerful weapons against hatred and abuse of power.